Okay, so the famous cave metaphor begins on at line 514, book 7. And the first paragraph goes like this. Next I said, compare the effect of education, the lack of it on our nature, to an experience like this. Imagine human beings living in an underground cave-like dwelling with an entrance a long way up, which is both open to the light and as wide as the cave itself. They've been there since childhood, fixed in the same place, with their necks and legs fettered, able only to see in front of them because their bonds prevent them from turning their heads around. Light is provided by a fire burning far above and behind them. Also behind them, but on higher ground, there is a path stretching between them and the fire. Imagine along this path a low wall has been built like the screen in front of puppeteers above which they show their puppets. Okay, so essentially we have here, this is the very famous cave metaphor. All right. And the first thing to recognize is that he says it is a, what did he call it? Compare it to our education. But the word education in ancient Greece was very different than education today. The word education, it's actually a Latin word, comes from the Latin word ducare, and ducare means to lead. And so education is about leading. And if you recall the tripartite soul, just to sort of give you a rundown of where we're going with this, so we got the tripartite soul, if you recall, with its 3 levels, right? And these lower levels are the base levels. In other words, these are the animalistic parts of us, the carnal parts of us, right? These are our emotions and our appetites. Okay, but this is truly what is uniquely human and close to the divine. And by that, he means essentially rational. Because to the ancients, the divine was rational. That is, God or the gods were rational, eternal, and unchanging. And it is reason that is the only element of the human soul which is unchanging. So it's the closest thing to divine. Okay, now where we're going ultimately with the cave metaphor is that the leading is this. If we're saying that education is to lead, then it's in this regard. To lead one from the base elements of the soul toward what is truly human, and that is logic and reason. So education is about orienting one away from the appetites and emotions, and the appetites and emotions are always based on the physical. If you think about it, right? If you want something, you're hungry, you want physical food. If you're passionate about something, it's for a physical kind of thing. And so part of education is, or not part of, at least in the ancient world, education is about leading people from their appetites and bettering themselves and making them more human. Now, I think a better translation for the metaphor, instead of saying that it is about the effect of education, a better English word would probably be enlightenment today. Because you're probably, familiar with education in terms of paying tuition and getting a piece of paper. And that is not at all what the ancients believed about education. The idea of sitting in chairs and passively being told what is true, really until the Industrial Revolution, education wasn't that way. Education always included aspects of virtue. Because virtues are what lift us out of our base selves and make us better and improve us ultimately at being human. So the deal is to lead us to being human rather than to keep us in the world of our appetites and emotions. But obviously, the irony is that education today, which is largely about buying a piece of paper in order to get a career or a job, is exactly the opposite. It reinforces us to stay in the world of the appetites by telling us that this is not divine and it's not uniquely human. What is uniquely human is your consuming. And so we are consumers. And we believe that the best thing about us, our reason, should be used to get us something in the world of appetites. It should be used to get us a good standard of living. So, from let's think when we hear the word education that we're really talking about enlightenment. Now, actually, let me clear. I think I can clear this whole thing. So, nice. Let's start over. The cave sort of goes like this, right? You have, he says, an underground cave-like dwelling that's open to the sun, right? And so out here is the sun. And there's a little video cartoon thing, which I hope you're able to see. So I'm going to kind of sketch this rather quickly. And he says, you've got these, basically it goes like this. You've got all these people in here who are caged up in such a way that all they can see is what's in front of them. And these are chains that chain them in place. And so their whole lives are basically about seeing the back of the cave wall. And behind them is sort of a path, a way out. And he said that there's a low wall, like the kind the puppeteers have. And then there's a fire, which provides light for the cave. Okay, so that kind of shines out there. There we go. And then there are puppeteers who show objects. Okay, that's supposed to be a puppeteer there. Don't, judge me on my pictures. But he's holding up that thing. And the puppeteers show images that then are reflected on the shadows of the cave wall. Okay, so the point here is that what he calls prisoners are people who are oriented in such a way that their entire reality is here. All they see are the images on the cave wall, which are created by and chosen by this guy. And this guy is called the puppeteer. And so we are led to believe that human societies, or caves, right, because this is the inside the cave. So the cave really is a constructed truth, a truth of social construction, wherein what everybody calls truth is really nothing but the reflected lesser truth of one that is chosen for us. So ultimately, you have two levels of truth in here. You have the truth of the shadowy reflection on the cave wall, and then you have the truth of the puppeteer who has chosen what truth will be for these prisoners. Okay. Now, Plato says, well, suppose that one of the prisoners is freed. Okay, so this green guy. And he begins to look the other way. As he looks the other way, he's going to become quite confused, because as he suggests at line, let me see, like 515 D. Consider then what being released from their bonds and cured of their ignorance would naturally be like if something like this came to pass. When one of them was freed and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his head, walk, and look toward the light, he'd be pained and dazzled and unable to see the things whose shadows he'd seen before, etc. So if someone is freed, so their chains are broken somehow, and they turn and look this way, first, they're going to be dazzled because the firelight is behind them, so their eyes will be confused. And then, as Plato suggests, when he considers this reality in light of this old reality, he's going to assume that this one is the real one. And the reason why is we tend to be more likely to call true what is familiar and what we can understand. Now, if we take the cave as an image of enlightenment, right? Enlightenment means coming towards knowledge, right? And so the journey of the soul is, this way towards enlightenment. Then you can see where he's going is with each new sort of level of awareness as we go down the road of education, our minds are blown for a little while until we get used to a new way of thinking. But then he says at around line 516, and if someone were dragged him away by force up the rough, steep path and didn't let him go till it dragged him into the sunlight, wouldn't he be pained at being treated that way? So suppose the guy is dragged out and he gets out here in the sun. The first reaction is the guy's not going to be able to see anything, right? I mean, you could imagine, if you're used to being in a cave and suddenly you're outside, right, you're not going to see anything. So again, your mind is blown a little bit by a new way of knowing. And then he says that eventually he won't be able to make much out in this world because his eyes aren't used to it. So, okay, here's the tree as an example. And so first you'll see the shadows of things, and then he'll see the things in themselves more easily when his eyes get adjusted to the light. So it takes time to become adjusted to the light. And so you could think back in the cave, right? The first time maybe you studied calculus or the first time you studied a new language. It kind of makes you confused, it blows your mind, and you might find that it's too difficult, and you might have the reaction of, I don't need that stuff. But then when you get out of the social world altogether, and you realize there's this huge dichotomy between inside the cave and outside the cave. In other words, there's a huge distinction between what is social and what is true. So this is sort of like the social world, what your society tells you, and this is what is true in itself. You realize that these are two completely different things. And what winds up happening is one realizes that there are many different levels of truth, really. We had the two inside the cave, and then there is the image of the thing in itself, and then there is the thing itself. So we got 4 levels of truth going on. And sort of the image of enlightenment is we go through these progressive levels of understanding reality if we are educated properly, moving to higher and higher levels of truth. Now, my drawing's getting a little cluttered, so let's stop there for now, and we'll finish this on the next part.